To have the Bermuda College involved in our presentation. Last time we had a meeting, we had a presentation by the Chamber of Commerce. It just shows that it's a lot of different things that's going on in the country, and what we're trying to focus on is how all those things connect and converge for our benefit. So before we get started on our presentation on the Bermuda Better Energy Plan, I'd like to invite a good friend of mine, Amy Harvey. She's a senior lecturer at the Bermuda College, and I'm just going to allow her to come up and introduce her students who are going to start off tonight's proceedings with a presentation. All right, so let's give Amy a round of applause, give thanks.
Okay, all right. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for having us. All the supporters, Greenrock, Best, B Solar, and if I forget anyone, I apologize. We're very honored to be here. I'm here to introduce my students from our 2000 level cultural and geography class. This semester we've been working really hard on taking the first steps at looking at our energy footprint on the campus and the steps we need to take to improve the sustainability of our campus. So tonight, presenting our findings and hopefully some good and sound recommendations, we have 3 students who have volunteered. The whole class worked on it, but 3 students are going to present. And we have Taj Dunville Elderbridge, Dominique Williams, and Ashley Steed. So if you could all come forward and tell us what we found. There's 2. I think so. So you're good.
Good evening, everyone. So this is basically this is a collaboration. We're split into 6 groups, and this is a collaboration of all of our groups, a summary of what we found. So we conducted an assured level 1 walkthrough audit of BC's energy usage, and what we did was we split into 6 groups, and each group was assigned a building, because Bermuda College has several different buildings, and each group was assigned 1 or 2 buildings, where we had to go and we used the checklist, and we found, we answered the checklist based on certain things about energy efficiency. And then we also conducted a survey where we asked students and staff and faculty a few questions about their energy consumption on campus, and we surveyed about 100 people, so that was what we found. And we also, in our groups, we made presentations to our class where we made recommendations on how to improve Bermuda College's energy efficiency and save money on our energy costs. So as a green school, Bermuda College became a green school in 2016, and as a green school, our goals should be to improve student performance and health, decrease operational costs and energy demands, encourage students and faculty to become more energy efficient on campus and at home, and protect the environment. And as a green school, we're supposed to tackle an initiative each year, and this year we chose energy.
So for data, we conducted a level 1 walkthrough energy audit. So we found that rooms had no natural light, 55% of it. Only 14% of rooms had energy efficient lights. Only 16% of rooms had Energy Star computers. Some rooms had AC on when they were left empty, and 50% of rooms are too cold, and most teachers at our school have personal heaters in the offices to make the temperature more tolerable using even more electricity. Windows, 65% of windows cannot be opened at the college. 10% of windows are damaged. 90% of windows are not insulated, and 13% of ceiling tiles were damaged. So in our student staff survey of 100 students that we surveyed on email, we found that plug personal devices on campus, people always, well, 11% of our findings, sometimes 70%, another 19%. And people do not turn off AC when they leave a room. 81% of people plug in their personal devices. 16% of people do not turn off the lights when they leave a room, and 57% of people use the elevators on campus.
And after we conducted this survey and walkthrough, we made recommendations for the college. So we split them up into two groups, low cost and high cost. So for our low cost, it's basically things that we as students and staff can change, like turning the AC units off when they're not needed, like on the weekends. Ensure the windows or doors are closed when the AC is on. Turning off appliances when they're not in use. Encouraging the use of natural light in classrooms. And make sure that the AC units are cleaned and maintained regularly so they don't have to work as hard to cool down a room. And for our high cost recommendations, replace all of the appliances with Energy Star rated appliances like the ACs and the computers. Replace the windows with insulated ones. Make all lights on campus uncensored. Convert to energy efficient light bulbs. Fix and replace damaged windows and ceiling tiles, and then explore renewable energy options like the solar. And we actually have a class that is learning to repair solar panels. So in the future, maybe they can get solar panels put onto the college and then they can fix it themselves, and then we save money, then we can buy other ones and they can install it and keep building on. And for our conclusion, we believe that the money that we save on our electricity bill can be used for money for scholarships for students that can't afford, their tuition. And yeah, that was our findings. And thank you very much.
I don't want you to leave just yet. But thank you guys very much. And as you see, the young people are getting very involved in this, the innovation, the oversights that we've had and the things that we've done. I don't think we've made these mistakes unintentionally or intentionally. I think that it's just we weren't necessarily focused on some details that are coming to light now, things that can really assist us in keeping costs down so we can make sure that money spent is actually going towards things that are more productive and we have less waste. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for the students while they're here? Okay, we have just 1 moment. We have some microphones. We want to make sure. Yeah, we're recording tonight, so. What's that? Okay. What's that? Swap mics. This is cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. 2 questions you can answer real quickly. When was this conducted, and has the information been passed to the administration at the college, and when was it passed to them, and when was you had any results from them or resolves? So that's 4 questions. Sorry. I can't count.
That's a loaded question. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, Ms. Harvey can help answer the exact dates, but we pretty much did the survey and the audit in late October, beginning of November, so just a couple weeks ago. So to answer your question, no, I'm not sure if the information's been passed on, but I'm sure that Ms. Harvey can answer that more better than I can.
Yeah, it's in the process. I've sent information to our facilities manager, and we're due to meet very soon, and he's very excited about getting on board and making changes to hopefully improve our efficiency. And yeah, hopefully we'll see, small changes that will hopefully make a big difference sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yes.
Okay. So, okay, one more. Okay. You have a question over here. Travis has the mic coming that way.
Yeah, so now that you have this benchmark, I assume that maybe in a year's time you'll do another audit and you'll be able to see how much you've saved, so you'll have a comparative. Is that your plan?
Good.
Maybe not for you if you won't be in the class anymore, but I would think that Amy would be repeating this possibly.
Well, as part of the eco-school process, you constantly have to monitor and evaluate and continue that cycle over and over. So each year, obviously we get different students, but we will have to continue doing this as long as in addition to all the other pathways, waste, healthy living, and all those things, we have to keep monitoring, auditing. and evaluating. So we will definitely, yeah, next year.
Okay. Another question at the back?
Good evening. Is that on? Just wondered, the students, what surprised you the most out of the results?
The thing that surprised me is that, well, we all knew that the rooms are too cold because we're in the rooms too, but that the teachers have the heaters on. So it's like it's using up more electricity having the heaters on in cold rooms. So yeah, that surprised me.
So what surprised me the most was that Bermuda College actually has these solar-powered umbrellas that have chargers in them, but nobody uses them, and that really surprised me because you don't even see a flyer around that says, "Oh, please, instead of plugging your phone in on the wall socket, go ahead and go outside and enjoy the sunlight and plug it in underneath the umbrella." So that's what surprised me because we have them and they're just being wasted.
And that they're closed. Like you would think that they would be open so people can use them, but they've been closed for like I don't know how long. So yeah, that's surprising too.
Good evening. I think I got to say I'm really blown away because Barrett Lightbourne was the one who really brought ASHRAE here to Bermuda. He passed earlier this year. And he did a lot of ASHRAE Level 1 audits. So to see you all taking it on, and Amy, and it's really commendable. So I think you should really be proud of yourselves. And it shows that one person or a group of people choosing to make a difference and choosing action, being the change they want to see. This data is now measurable and is going to make a change. So you should be really proud of yourselves for doing that. So I want to mention that, and I want to say, what a fantastic conclusion. You know, that's what it's all about. If we take the waste we're wasting and make it less, we can help bridge the gap between rich and poor. And that's what we need, a more harmonious, equal society. So I think it's really fantastic. And how have you been thinking about how the knowledge that you got through this exercise, have you thought about how you might want to take that into your everyday lives, or where do you want to go next with this?
So actually, I took another one of Miss Harvard's classes, and in that class we had to do it's called the Green Challenge, where we had to do one thing where we conserved energy or saved water or did some kind of green action for a month. And the thing that I did for my project was actually saving water. So I found that I saved about in the month that I did it for, I saved over, I can't remember the exact number, but I saved a lot of water from shortening my showers from 15 minutes to 3 minutes. I saved a lot of water. So that was one thing I learned, and it's really awesome that Ms. Harvey makes us think like this and challenge ourselves to think green, because we often forget to think green, and it's important that Ms. Harvey continues, doing it, because it's awesome.
And we're doing the green challenge now in her other class. And I'm doing paper towel, the waste and paper towels. So trying to reduce my usage of that. And we all just attended an energy summit the other day too. So we're trying to take what we learned from this class, from Ms. Harvey, put it into our everyday lives, so we can make the world a better place, because climate change is real, as we learn every day. So yeah.
Well done.
Okay. All right. I think we have one more question, and then we'll go on to the next presentation.
Yeah, thanks. Great project. I just had a question on, did you all estimate at all how much money you might save in enacting any of these green initiatives?
I think one group did estimate. It wasn't my group. So yeah, we don't really remember. We didn't put that into the presentation, but one group did estimate it.
Sorry, just to interject. I think it was roughly, just doing very basic things, was going to be roughly around $50,000 a year, just from flicking off lights, just simple little things, changing the temperature by a couple of degrees, not having it at 57 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm a guilty person. I have my heater on too because I can't work when I'm freezing. But yeah, just that was one of the rough estimates. So yeah, and hopefully if we implement some of the other ones, it'll be even more, which, like they said, could go towards better things.
Yeah, give thanks, Amy. Just at this point, you know, the students mentioned that they have the green flag. The green flag is something that comes from them being involved in a program that Greenrock has been running for a few years now called the Eco Schools program. So what's happened is that several schools are now participating in this, and they have different initiatives that they are embarking upon. West Pembroke was one of the first schools to really take on the kind of energy pathway, and they saved so much money at West Pembroke that the government called us, and they said, so how can we get this in every school? We're still trying to work out the details of how to make that happen, but you know, it just proved the results like here, and the numbers that they or the money that they were able to save, it was so significant, you know, and it was all from small changes that the students and the staff made at the school, you know, so it just shows how much is the difference that we can make. So I want to congratulate the students on the good work, and encourage them to keep working hard to make sure that you keep your green flag. It's not easy because we actually to add new pathways every year, but you have to keep up all the ones that you already started. So let's give them a round of applause on the good work. All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Unfortunately, our next speaker had an emergency and was unable to make it at this time. Is still going to try to make it to the event before we finish. So we're going to move right on to the presentation of the Bermuda Better Energy Plan. For those of you who just came in, and I may have missed it at the start, but my name is Eugene Dean. I'm one of the directors at Greenrock. And we're raising awareness about this because at the moment, the regulatory authority is going through an IRP process that will determine the way that we generate and distribute energy in Bermuda for the next 20 years. The way that the process is set up is that Belco was asked to submit a plan. Belco has submitted a plan. The concern we have is that Belco's plan commits us to fossil fuels for the next 20 years. Their plan involves less than 10% of renewables in the next 20 years, which means we're subjected to the volatility of fuel prices around the world. We also don't do anything to really impact, you know, or change our impact on climate change, our carbon emissions and things of that nature, which you'll see from the presentation are very high. So the way the process goes is that Belco submitted their initial plan. There was a consultation period, and then the Bermuda Better Energy Plan was submitted as one of the alternatives. What we've been told by the RA is that the Bermuda Better Energy Plan is the only plan that is comprehensive enough to actually be an alternative to Belco's plans. There were other submissions. Most of them were around individual technologies, you know, but this plan was more comprehensive. So the process that we're in now is a consultation period, and the urgency around our messaging is because that consultation period comes to an end at the end of the month. That is the opportunity that we have to give input to this process. Belco's plan is status quo, which means that unless our voices are heard, this becomes the plan. So that's the urgency in this. It's very important for us to submit to the RA, let them know what we think about Belco's plan, let them know what you may think about our plan, which you'll learn about in a few minutes, you know, and how you see Bermuda's energy future. You know, this is an opportunity. Generally, what's happened is that, you know, the decisions that Belco makes as the sole energy provider in Bermuda has been all internal, and they make decisions, and they run the business, and we're subjected to whatever changes they make or don't make. This process was injected to allow people to have input into the process. So we're encouraging everyone to get involved and take advantage of that opportunity. We've had some tools that have been developed, which you'll see on the website. betterenergyplan.bm, and I think Stuart has been good and brought some information with us. We've tried to make this as simple as possible. We have templates that are set up, you know, that shows you the information that's required on your submissions. Also, we have listed the 4 questions that the RA has asked everyone who's making a submission to answer. So these are the 2 plans, and this is just a snapshot so that you can see. In the middle, imported fossil fuels. This down the bottom is Tynes Bay waste to energy, and this is renewables. This is efficiency. Over time, us switching to LED bulbs, getting a new washer, getting a new refrigerator, different heaters, things of that nature, which use less energy. This is a snapshot of the Bermuda Better Energy Plan, you know, which in the future, 2038, which would be the end of the period that the IRP is governing, would see us generating our energy in a big way using renewables, you know. Also, we've incorporated a lot more efficiency in it. All that will be explained in the plan, but this is just a quick snapshot. Unfortunately, a plan like this actually puts us like 10 years back once you see from the presentation what people are doing all around the world. So that's our major concern. Their plan also involves LNG, liquefied natural gas, and making a huge investment in a regasification plant on the island. So I'm sure most of you have heard somewhere along the line about fracking. And if you just do a quick search on LNG plants and explosions, then you'll see a lot of information around that as well. So that's a major concern of ours, and we're hoping that with your help that we can give the necessary input to make sure that we steer our energy future in the right direction. All right? These are some of the organizations that have endorsed the plan: Greenrock, Solar, BEST, the Bermuda Solar Energy Association. And the small logo down the bottom is from Etude. They're actually the UK-based sustainability engineering firm that was actually hired to produce the plan. And this is a list of people who have contributed. So initially it started off with a contribution from Solar. Etude then contributed a lot of free hours in excess of $10,000 worth of work in order to get the plan done. And then all these individuals that you see here have contributed financially to ensure that the plan was able to be made and that research and work is still able to be ongoing. So these are the energy experts who were involved in the development of the plan. One who's homegrown, Chris Warboys, who's standing to my right now. Chris Warboys was actually working for government in 2011. He actually wrote the energy white paper in 2011. But Chris has his master's in renewable energy. Thomas and Dora were actually on the island when we gave the presentation a week and a half ago. Dora has a PhD in electrical and electronic engineering, and Thomas' background is in mechanical engineering. Will, Naomi, and Leon were also involved, and you can see that all of them are extremely qualified. So these were the people who did all the research to put the plan together, you know. And just to say that when they went and developed this plan, they went in just to see what was going to be best for Bermuda. What's different, I guess, about our proposal is that, you know, none of us who are involved with this have any type of, I guess, financial or business connection to the outcome of this. This plan would be for Bermuda. It's not like Solar or Greenrock wants to be Belco. You know, we just want to make sure that our energy future is taking us in a positive direction. All right, so now I'll let Stuart Crinler from Solar take over, and he would let you know why it was necessary for us to develop another plan.
Thank you, Eugene. Well, and a big thanks again for everyone for coming this evening. And to just go along what Eugene said, that basically, why do we need another plan? Well, one thing is Belco, to their credit, they have made an incredibly reliable grid for Bermuda, probably the most reliable of any country of our size and jurisdiction. So that's really important. what probably happens over time is people get stuck on a certain paradigm, a certain way of doing things. So it's only natural for BOCO to look at another fossil fuel, LNG, which was less expensive. But perhaps we can help show them a better way. And by doing that, work together. So a lot of people think this plan is the B Solar and Etude plan. Far from it. We would love BOCO to take the information, and that's what we hope will happen, in Bermuda take the information and do it. We certainly want to see a strong BOCO and want them to do the right thing. We have no intention or time to be putting in a huge plan, as you'll see. But I just want to make that clear that this is a way to show the Bermuda how to do things better, and I think BOCO could actually be more profitable if they employed some of these techniques, and that would help all of Bermuda. So why another plan? Well, when we saw the plan, we said, wow, it's a high reliance on fossil fuels. What's going on in the rest of the world? Anecdotally, we know what's going on. Well, let's look at the numbers. So as you see, this is 2017, money invested in new generation. So fossil fuels got a little less than a quarter of that investment, right? About 100 billion, a lot of money. Renewable energy got 265 billion. This is what's going on right now. New generation is renewable. Why? Because it makes dollars and common sense. It saves money. Solar and wind are less expensive than any other generation source. So when we talk about renewables, we're talking about solar and wind. There's all sorts of other ideas out there, but we have to go with what's proven and tested. So we got 100 billion went into wind, 150 billion went into solar. We're talking about mature technologies, 50-year track record for solar and 30-plus year track record for wind. That's what we want to be doing. And just to put it in perspective, looking at the growth, and some people say, well, perhaps people are looking at data that's a bit old. And you can see, if you're looking at data from 10 years ago, there was hardly any wind or solar going on a major scale. Even just 4 years ago. So this is showing the capacity and how it's increasing. We call this exponential growth. Every year, it's growing faster than the year before. Why? Because it's less expensive. That's the most important thing. So we're not doing something new. We're proposing that Bermuda looks at doing something that's done everywhere else in the world so we can stay pace with the rest of the world. So people talk about targets. People are making some impressive targets. Bermuda still working on creating some targets, and it's exciting to see Walter Raban really starting to make some positive moves. So we have to give accolades to the government there. But we want to see action. And these are countries that aren't targets. There's over 20% in their renewable mix right now. So today, for example, last week, the UK had almost a week of 47% of their electricity was from wind power. You've got Aruba. They were here for the Energy Summit last Thursday. 38% of their electricity is from renewables. The Prime Minister of Aruba said, we cut our oil use from 6,000 barrels a day to 3,000 barrels a day. The amount of money we have saved as a country from exporting that money out of our country has been massive. And that's impressive, and that's what we want to see. Belize is about, I think, 48%. So these are happening right now today. And some of these countries do not have great sun or great wind as we do here in Bermuda, and we'll get into that. Then we want to look at, okay, let's focus on Bermuda specifically, and then look at, more closer to our neighbors. So we've got Jamaica just said they want to see 50% of their energy from renewables in 2030. Pretty impressive, and we'll watch a video on that. Our direct competitor, perhaps, is the Cayman Islands. They're talking about 70% in 2030. I remember flying over there last year, and I was amazed by the big solar arrays I saw, and they're being quite progressive and doing a lot. So meanwhile, if we went with the status quo IRP, this is where we would land relative to the rest of the Caribbean region. perhaps that's not quite where we want to be as a country. Perhaps want to be a little closer to the other end of the spectrum. So that's partly why we wanted to make this plan relevant and knowledgeable. Here's the other issue is, we talk about fossil fuels. In my heart, environmentally, it's really unfortunate. A lot of us have children and family. A lot of us have friends with asthma and cancer. Fossil fuels are related to those things. But the reality is, we got to talk dollars and cents. That's what people listen to, and a lot of people in Bermuda do not have an easy time paying their bills, much less their electricity bills. So it's risky, right? This is the price of natural gas over the years. So if you say, well, I think it's going to be $5, and then it jumps to 14, that's going to hurt. That's going to hurt people. So by tying ourselves to fossil fuels, we're tying ourselves to this risky volatility. And this is absolutely what we've seen in the past and what we're going to see in the future, because as there's less of a resource, there's increased volatility. And what's interesting is the IRP status quo is saying, well, this is the range of prices we'll probably see for the next 20 years. But the funny thing is, the prices have been a fair bit of time over that. So perhaps it's being a bit optimistic. And if you're a bit optimistic and you make a mistake, it could have serious consequences. So those are all the reasons why we felt it was important to provide an alternative. To put it in a different perspective, the dotted lines are what the International Energy Association, the experts in fossil fuel prices, and by the way, we've been told that actually they price a bit lower than reality, so maybe it'll be higher. And then the purple line is what the status quo IRP is suggesting. So again, are we being a bit optimistic, or are they being a bit optimistic in how they've calculated the prices? And what does that mean if they get it wrong? If we're up here and we expected it to be down here, that's going to hit our fuel adjustment quite hard on our monthly bills. And it's going to hit the poorest and most vulnerable in our community the hardest. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Chris Woolboys to talk about how the plan was developed. Thank you.
Just to clarify one thing before we move on, IRP stands for Integrated Resource Plan. That's effectively a power company's plan for what different generation technologies they're going to use. So if you hear us refer to IRP, we're talking about either Belco's plan or our plan. So I'm just going to talk briefly about how we developed our plan. So the company I work with in London, Etude, was hired initially by B Solar, but now more of our work's actually been crowdfunded than the original amount that B Solar put in to develop effectively an IRP for Bermuda. To start with, we looked at Bermuda's Electricity Act, and this gives pretty clear guidance on what the priorities should be for any generation mix plan. Effectively, it's clean, affordable electricity that preserves Bermuda's position as an international jurisdiction where people want to come and live and do business. So in order to come up with a plan that best meets those objectives, we adopted a scenario-based approach. This is industry standard practice for developing integrated resource plans. So we did 4 scenarios. Our first one, shown on the left here, was Belco's plan. So that's about 90% liquefied natural gas generation with a modest component of solar. We then looked at an energy efficiency scenario. So we felt that Belco's projections for energy efficiency were a bit conservative. And so our projections showed that demand for electricity is likely to reduce by about 30% over the next 20 years. And that's just through people replacing appliances, changing light bulbs, that kind of thing. It's not with any policy change from government or any new laws. So that's just something we think is going to happen based on our modeling. We then looked at a third scenario where we pursued solar photovoltaic technology as much as we possibly could. And finally, we looked at what we're now calling the optimum renewables scenario, and that was a more balanced scenario where we brought offshore wind into the generation mix. as well as solar. And we retrospectively named it the optimum renewable scenario because the modeling results suggested that was the optimum mix for Bermuda. And one of the key differences in our approach compared to Belco's IRP was that we did a much broader range of scenarios. So Belco, looked at 5 to 10% of the electricity coming from renewable energy, but in some of our more aggressive renewable scenarios, we're looking at up to 64% renewables. And this is normal practice in other parts of the world. You really want to broaden out your scenarios and test what will happen with different technologies. In terms of the process we used to evaluate each scenario, there's industry standards processes for developing integrated resource plans. So we basically followed them. And to do that, you start with a demand forecast. So we need a good prediction of how much electricity we think there's going to be over the study period, and that was a 20-year period. We then need to assess the potential for energy efficiency. So how's that demand likely to reduce over time? We then look at what electricity sources we have available in Bermuda, and we're looking at the financial and the environmental costs of those electricity sources. We put all that information together into a model that accounts for things like intermittency and the need for battery storage and the cost of those things. And the results of that help us to identify what the optimum mix is. So we're just going to run through each of those steps quickly now. So the demand forecast, the black solid line there, that's Belco's forecast from their integrated resource plan. And we reviewed it and felt it was plausible, so we actually used that as the baseline for our plan. We actually increased it slightly because we felt their projections for electric vehicle uptake were a bit conservative. So we're projecting that there'll be about 4,700 electric vehicles on the roads by 2038. I should be specific, electric cars on the roads by 2038. But as you can see, that only leads to quite a modest increase in demand for electricity because the distances driven are small in Bermuda. And electric vehicles are very efficient, so they don't actually need a huge amount of electricity to charge them. We then looked at the potential for energy efficiency, and this is just an example of what we did for the residential sector, but we also looked at the commercial sector separately. And so we broke energy consumption down by end use. So we looked at air conditioning, lighting, water heating, refrigeration, all these things separately. We built up a picture of what current patterns of consumption are like, so using typical efficiencies for appliances which are deployed today. We then looked up the lifetimes of these energy-consuming products and what they're likely to be replaced with over the period. And so factoring this in, we can see that with a pretty detailed breakdown, we have quite good confidence that energy consumption is likely to reduce just very naturally over time. And so if we go back to our demand curve, that thick black line on the top there, that's our original demand curve that we took from Belco. The grey wedge above that is where we've added in the demand from the electric vehicles. We've then subtracted the energy efficiency, both commercial and residential, and that's giving us a modified demand curve. So that black line along the bottom there is where we think electricity demand is going to be in the future. And as you can see, in the past, we've actually seen a much faster rate of decline in demand for electricity than what we're projecting. And as many of us know, that's due to a lot of people leaving the island, as well as energy efficiency and some distributed solar. And so that's why in the future we're not projecting, a demand reduction that steep, because the bit we're showing in the future is just due to energy efficiency. So once we've established what demand is going to be over the 20-year period, we then look at what electricity generation sources we have available. So as Stuart said, we looked at wind and solar because they're reliable, mature technologies for which Bermuda has great resources. And then we looked at fossil fuels. And for that, we looked at fuel oil, liquefied natural gas, which is what Belco's proposing, and liquid propane gas as well. So starting with solar, Bermuda, as I'm sure everyone's aware, has an excellent solar resource, so much so that just 8% of the building footprint, so effectively 8% of our roof space, could provide 60 megawatts of solar photovoltaic panels. And to put that in context, Belco's peak demand is around 110 megawatts. So the middle of the hottest day of the year in the summer, when everyone's running their ACs flat out, it gets up to 110. Some periods it gets down to below 60. So, you know, just that 8% of the building footprint is over half of peak demand. Utility scale solar, there's room for about 24 megawatts, we think. So that's a total of 84 megawatts between those two. Solar panels last 25 to 30 years. They're very reliable and they're a mature technology. So if we have so much space for solar, why don't we just go all out just for solar on its own? What this graph is showing is a week in July, and the black line there is demand for electricity. So that's showing how the demand varies each day throughout that week. And then the yellow, obviously, is solar. And so that's showing if we had 140 megawatts of solar, so, you know, we covered, say, 16% of our roofs with solar panels and built the large-scale solar arrays and maybe a bit more. This is kind of what we'd see happening. So during the middle of the day, we're producing far more electricity than we can actually use. Of course, we can store some of it, and that's what's being shown in green here. So this is electricity that we've stored during the day when there's too much to use, and we're then using overnight. But what we found with the modeling is when you account for the cost of storing that electricity, and also a little bit of the electricity at the top of those peaks we have to throw away because we don't have enough room to store it, which is obviously wasteful. And when you factor all that in and do the calculations, it was not optimal to pursue solar to such a great extent given the current costs of all the technologies. And so we downwardly revised that to about 84 megawatts of solar. We've then got offshore wind turbines. So Bermuda has an excellent wind resource. Belco's done numerous studies over the years. UCSB did a study in 2014. And then we did our own study for this report as well. And they all showed the same thing. There's a really good wind resource. We'd be looking at 6 to 12 megawatt turbines. And what we proposed for the purposes of the modeling was 10 6 megawatt turbines. So that'd be 60 megawatts of solar. The lifespan of modern turbines is 25 to 30 years, and they're rated, a standard offshore turbine is rated up to 70 meters per second, or 156 miles an hour. That's kind of the bottom end of a Category 5 hurricane, so that's more than any wind speeds that's been recorded in Bermuda. And there's a new generation of turbines coming out now called T-class turbines, which are being developed for typhoons in Asia. And so almost certainly the turbines considered for Bermuda would be T-class turbines and would be rated for stronger wind speeds than 156 miles an hour. And again, offshore wind is a reliable, mature technology. We didn't look at specific locations in terms of where it would go. There's a lot of different options, but there's also a lot of stakeholders who need to be involved in that process. You've got the airport, who'd be very concerned about aviation corridors and radar interference, marine and ports, reef ecologists, recreational fishermen. There's kind of this huge list of stakeholders that would need to be consulted. But certainly to fit 10 turbines, we felt, you know, that space was not an issue. So what does our electricity generation look like with those 10 turbines? This is showing the first week of January. So same as the other graph, the black line there is our demand for electricity. The shape of the curve's a bit different to in the summer because we're not running air conditioning as much. And then the blue areas there, that's the electricity that would be coming from an offshore wind farm. So what you can see is there's entire 24-hour periods where all of Bermuda's electricity could be coming from renewables, but there are still big amounts of time where we need fossil fuels, which is the area shown in grey. And the solar you're seeing there in yellow, that's about 5 megawatts of rooftop systems which have already been built. About 6 megawatts that's about to be built at the airport finger. And then we're assuming another 4 or 5 megawatts that will be built in the next few years, because this modelling was carried out in 2022. And the reason we chose that year is because that's the first year Belco are proposing that their LNG plant would come online. So that was kind of a good year to compare the costs of all the technologies. In terms of our fossil fuel options, we consider fuel oil, LNG, LPG. They're all flexible. That's why we're using them. They need to be part of the generation mix. They're all relatively high producers of carbon dioxide and other pollutants, and the costs are typically volatile for all those fuels, although to varying extents. So one of the most important parts of the work we've done was calculating accurately the electricity costs throughout the period of the study. And the way we did this was to use something called the levelized cost of electricity. And so I'm just going to walk you through that calculation because it's really important to understand how that's done for you to have confidence in the results of our work. So effectively, we take the lifetime costs of the electricity generator and we divide them by the lifetime electricity production. So starting on the top line there on the left, we take the capital costs, so that's turnkey operational costs installed in Bermuda. We add in the cost of financing. We then add in the cost of the fuel, which of course for solar and wind is zero. And then we add in the cost of maintenance. So that's both fixed and variable maintenance costs. So that gives us the total cost. We then divide by the annual energy production, and we factor in things like a small degradation every year for solar because your efficiency does very slowly reduce. And then we multiply that annual energy production by the lifetime of the system. So total cost divided by total energy production. The reason it's important to understand this equation is because when someone does these calculations, it's very easy to manipulate the data that goes into them to skew the results to produce the numbers you want. So if we assume a slightly higher capital cost or cost of financing for solar, for example, and quite a short lifetime, we can push the cost of electricity up, which is obviously something we wanted to avoid. And so if anyone has the time or interest in actually reading the report, in the appendices, we've published all the assumptions we made, so we're being very transparent about all of this, and we welcome scrutiny. And we also adopted a sort of 3 different cases for each scenario. So we looked at the worst case, the best case in terms of how low the cost could be, and then we picked a reference scenario, which is what we used for the modeling. And the reference scenario wasn't simply the average of the worst case and the best case. We picked each one of those 6 different inputs to the calculation in terms of what we felt was most accurate and most representative for Bermuda. So I'll just say some of the comments on like the articles on the Royal Gazette. We get a lot of people kind of who sort of pick up on one element of these costs. And it's always important to bear in mind, like, if you focus on one element of the costs, like the maintenance costs or the capital costs, without the context of the other costs and the lifetime energy generation, it kind of doesn't give you an accurate impression of what the cost of electricity will be. So it's really important when we discuss these things to do so, you know, in a kind of comprehensive way. So the results of these calculations showed that bulk solar, so large-scale solar, is Bermuda's cheapest form of electricity generation at 9 cents a kilowatt hour. A really good sense check for this figure we got coming out of the calculations was the airport solar project, which is contracted to sell electricity for like 20 years plus, I think, at just over 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So that, you know, that's cheaper than Belco's fuel costs today, let alone when you factor in inflation. So that number is kind of not up for debate. It is what it is. Offshore wind then comes in at just under 17 cents a kilowatt hour. Then distributed solar at 20 cents a kilowatt hour. And finally fuel oil and LNG at 23 cents a kilowatt hour. The reason distributed solar is more expensive is because there's a lot more, you're losing economies of scale, and you've got to go through a lot more planning applications, and kind of paperwork to get those systems deployed, and so that pushes the cost up. So some additional work we've done this week is projecting those costs into the future. So these are for 2022, the first year that LNG could be deployed in Belco's plan. And so what we've done is, using US Energy Information Administration data, we've projected those cost calculations for the rest of the study period. So this now starts to give us an idea of where the costs are likely to go for each of the technologies. So what we're seeing here is for fuel oil, which is what we currently burn. If we keep doing that, that low black line is the best we're going to see. So that's the reference case, which is historically very conservative. And the top line is the sort of least conservative scenario. So that's where the EIA thinks it could go. And so these costs are the cost of electricity generated in Bermuda. Then for LNG, we're showing the same thing here. So there's a much smaller spread of volatility that's expected, which is one of the reasons why Belco is proposing it. And the cost of electricity comes in cheaper than fuel oil as well, which is another reason that Belco's proposed it. And so we then end up with renewables. So the scale is the same on all of these graphs. And so you can see our starting point for renewables, as we saw on the bar chart earlier, was lower. So they're already cheaper than LNG or fuel oil. But as we look to the future, the cost is just getting less and less each year. One thing to consider with this is the year you deploy a renewable technology, you lock in at that price. So if we build offshore wind in 2022, we lock in at just under 17 cents a kilowatt hour. If we build it 5 years later, it might be 1 cent cheaper, but whatever the price is the year we install it, we kind of lock ourselves into that price. And so what's likely to happen is the rooftop solar, because the systems are very dispersed, it's going to take decades to sort of build all the systems and deploy them. So what we'll see is this gradual long-term reduction in the cost of electricity being generated from distributed solar. So I'm just going to show all those graphs once again, just so everyone can kind of digest that. So finally, we looked at environmental costs. My colleague Dora, who was here last week, did a lot of research looking into life cycle costs. She focused mainly on carbon dioxide, and we just used that as a proxy for other emissions, which isn't, there's better ways of doing it, but we had to limit the scope of the study because there was a lot of work to do. What this analysis showed was that waste to energy was kind of the highest emission source of electricity. So that 1,000 is 1,000 grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour of electricity generated. We're not saying waste to energy is a bad thing. It's a good way of disposing of combustible waste, but it's not necessarily an environmentally friendly way of generating electricity. Next was oil at 900 grams, and then liquefied natural gas, which is what Belco is proposing. So that is better than fuel oil. But when you look at solar and offshore winds, you can see you're a long way away from the kind of step change in emissions that they deliver.
So Chris, perhaps it's a good time to remind everyone, thanks so much for getting through this. It's a 56-page document, highly technical. Maybe it's a good time for a stretch. Everyone want to stand up, do a little stretch or something, because I appreciate everyone hanging in there for it. And the modeling is going to get even deeper. But we're lucky to have Chris here. Well, Chris, maybe I could assist and jump in, and then, because I've always wanted to do this.
Yeah, cool.
We had PhD Dr. Dora Mao on island, so it's a tough act to follow. But perhaps I'll try, and then if I forget anything, Chris could, because the modeling was really incredible and very important. Basically, hour by hour for the entire year, how does all these pieces of the puzzle come together? So the first thing you can look at to how to basically reduce those peaks, those curves, is demand response. What does that mean? It means have your water heater running when the sun's shining and have your air conditioner running at that time a lot more than you would run it in the evening, which wasn't really modeled. There wasn't time to do a lot of that. But that is the least expensive way to add more solar instead of adding batteries.
Just to provide a bit more context, the purpose of the dispatch, we call it dispatch modeling, where we look at every hour of the year is to figure out how do we integrate these intermittent sources of electricity. So a lot of people say renewable energy is unreliable, and technically if you talk to an energy geek, that's not accurate. Renewable energy sources are actually more reliable than fossil fuel generators. Like wind and solar have like 95 to 99% reliability, but they are intermittent. And so what this is all about is how can we use those intermittent sources of electricity to provide the energy we need.
Yeah, so intermittency is a factor of renewables, but it's not a problem. So the other thing we can do is curtail. As electricity prices decrease and they become so cheap, if you're going to lose a few percent over the year, it's really not as big of a deal because it's a quarter of the price of what you'd pay for fossil fuel use. So you can afford to let some go. Battery storage is everyone's favorite. It's the sexiest thing out after solar. And so everyone talks about batteries. Absolutely, there's some battery storage. And Chris mentioned if you've got 5,000 electric vehicles on the island, which could be very conservative, we could end up with twice that. There's 20,000 vehicles now, so only a quarter of vehicles in 2040. Possibly that's going to be very different in 3 years when there's a lot more models. You have all of those rolling around. It's 148 megawatt hours of battery, so quite a lot of battery. Only a small percentage plugged in and being used could make a big difference to the cost of handling intermittent renewables. And then finally, the fossil fuel generators that we already have anyway, they already cover the island, so it's already enough. And to run them at 30 to 40% of what they run now is a lot less expensive. They will last a lot longer, and it's good to have as a backup. So it makes sense to use the existing engines, like the north expansion there in Belco that they're building now. That's already been approved. It's already happening. It's not a terrible thing because they're far more efficient than the engines that they're going to be retiring. And it's 56 megawatts, perfect backup to be the alternative for the baseline of renewables. And then you got to put it all together. So we got our cauldron there, nice brew of mixed flexible technologies to lower our risk. So you got the sun and wind data, you've got the efficiency data, and then the demand forecast. Chris has already mentioned how you create the life cycle cost of energy. We saw the airport finger at 10 cents. On our electricity bills, we're paying 48 cents. All that has to go into the model. And then how the pollution is. And then, as we just talked about, balancing that intermittency. You've got some curtailment, some demand response, some fossil fuel backup, and of course some battery storage. And then you put all that together, and you end up with what actually could happen. So this is looking at an average week in January, looking at real data of the solar radiation from the airport's pyranometer, they call it, and the wind data from the airport tracking station, and look at what our wind resource is. And as you see, there are some 24-hour periods completely covered by renewables. Actually, wind is playing a huge role, which makes sense because it's January. But we do have days where the batteries have been charged up the day before, and now they're being used in the evening. And there's still some good bits of fossil fuels in there, but certainly way less than 90%, which was proposed as the other option. And then we've got to look at summertime. So summertime, you see the sun is really doing its job, as we know in Bermuda, and then the wind is still playing a part. Again, we've got the battery backup there, as well as the fossil fuel. So it all comes together nicely. And this also is a good representation of showing how flexible it is. If there's an issue with the solar, you still got the fossil fuel backup. If there's an issue with the wind, you still got the backup. But together, they make us more flexible for new technologies as they come available. And that's important.
I think one thing to say on this, this is not like novel. This is being done every day all across the world. There's places in Denmark that a decade ago, their operations center, they're forecasting the wind for days in advance. And they have a pretty good confidence in terms of what the wind speed's going to be. And so again, renewable energy is intermittent. It's not unpredictable. You can predict it.
Yeah, there's that website where you can log into what the Ukraine grid is doing in real time. We can maybe do that afterwards, and you could see the solar, the wind, and all the different pieces. So the bottom line is the results, and Chris, I'm happy to try to speak to it, but basically what it all comes down to is in the end, renewable energy is a fraction of the cost of fossil fuel use. However, you've got to pay to make sure you've got that balancing, you've got that intermittency covered. So when you take it all into account, if you look at the baseline of 90% fossil fuels, the cost is quite similar to having high solar or the optimum renewable scenario. The difference is this is a snapshot of 1 year. This is estimated at 2022. I should also mention that Etude has purposely been very conservative with their numbers. So if anyone tries to pick at them or critique them, they're going to have a hard time. It's likely that there will be lower for renewables. We're being overly cautious. Battery prices are predicted to be cut in half in the next 4 years, for example. So, but the bottom line is you've got an option to have similar prices but stability. You know the price of the electricity with renewables for the next 20 years, it's locked in. What you don't know is what's going to happen with fossil fuels. But what's likely to happen is it's going to be going up, and it's probably going to be choppy up and down, up and down. I think just last week, in 1 day, the price of LNG went up 17%. Just boom. Something happened in the Middle East or some policy change happened. And if all our electricity, or if all the natural gas is coming from fracking, and there's an administration change that isn't so favorable to fracking, the price is going to go up. So that's what's the most important thing about this graph, I feel. And then if we're talking about pollution, right, there's different ways to measure it. Focusing strictly on carbon emissions, what we're currently doing, we're at about 886. If you're looking at the other plan, the default plan, is going to bring us down to 610. So that's a little better, not a whole lot better. If you're looking at the high solar proportion, we're at about 420. But the optimum renewables were 341. So what does that mean? So again, for a similar price, if you want to go for the fossil fuel heavy plan, you're going to end up way more in a much higher pollution regime. This is important for our competitiveness as a country. People want to come to Bermuda for our interesting tax laws, which are very important for us. But also more and more businesses are saying, well, Cayman also has some interesting tax laws. Let's see what's going on the ground. How do you guys produce electricity? Oh, we're going to have 70% solar by 2030. Oh, Bermuda, how are you producing electricity? Well, we're 90% fossil fuel. In my charter of my business, it says I can only invest in countries that have at least 30% renewables. So, you know, you're shooting yourself in the foot. So to be competitive, to be attractive, to be resilient, it's pretty clear. So I guess, Chris, you want to finish off?
Yeah, cool. So our recommendation is what's now being called the Bermuda Better Energy Plan. But just to reiterate, when we started this process, we were just looking at 4 scenarios and trying to do all these calculations and see, you know, what was going to be the most affordable option for Bermuda and environmentally what could be the best option for Bermuda. And so it was really at the end of this process and all these calculations that the scenario with the wind and the solar kind of blended. You know, it became apparent that was the optimum mix. And so we were like, we need to give it a name so people know what we're talking about. So we've called it the Bermuda Better Energy Plan. And so this is an indication of what we're talking about. So as Eugene said earlier, that bar along the bottom there, that's the waste to energy plant up at Tynes Bay. We've then got 60 megawatts of distributed solar, 24 megawatts of large-scale solar, and then 60 megawatts of offshore wind energy. And then we're looking at just under a 30% reduction in electricity consumption from energy efficiency. That's just naturally going to happen over time. And so that results in about a 76% reduction in fossil fuel use. And to put that in context, I think Belco spent about 85 million last year on importing fuel. So you're looking at taking that number down to about like probably under 20 million. And it also, I think a key point that several people have made that we weren't kind of talking about before was it gives Bermuda flexibility. So we're not saying we put everything into this one power plant that only runs off this one fuel. We're saying we're going to go for like a portfolio approach. So we're using technologies with low cost of electricity and stable costs, and we're bringing a lot of those into the generation mix. And we're using a small amount of fossil fuels to reduce our exposure to fuel price volatility. We had, actually the regulatory authority of Bermuda had an independent review done of all the IRP proposals. And this was kind of our score sheet for the work we did. And so they found that it was broadly compliant with the purposes of the Electricity Act. The only thing they kind of didn't give us a tick on was the costs of upgrading the grid. But this is really something that Belco would need to do. It's like an entire separate study. If we had that number, we could easily put it into our calculations and take it into account. One thing with grid costs is that because most grid infrastructure has a very long lifespan, we're talking like 30, 40, even 50 years for some of Belco's transformers and cable, the cost per kilowatt hour tends to be very low. So we're quite confident that even if you had to spend like 100 million on upgrading the grid, a lot of those upgrades would be required anyway to replace aging infrastructure. And any additional costs that were incurred to accommodate renewables, they get divided out over time so much that it would be a very small impact. So the headlines, 64% of Bermuda's electricity could come from renewables. Renewable energy is cheaper. Bermuda could source the majority of its energy locally instead of importing it. We could take meaningful action against climate change, so a 62% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. We could create jobs in local energy production. So I think Stuart already knows a couple of people working in the wind industry in Europe. Offshore wind turbines, they generate 23 million kilowatt hours a year, those big 6 megawatt turbines, but they cost about $1 million a year to maintain. So a lot of that money is going towards labor. So there's long-term useful work in kind of keeping all that going. And our energy supply can be more resilient.
Well, so I was going to say, if you put it all into perspective again now, talking about competitiveness on the world stage and also where we are as a country, what's important is this is not, Chris makes this point, Etude are energy experts, and they've done an incredible job modeling this. This is not a target that we might be able to hit. Our country's small. We know what we can do. This is absolutely achievable. So 64% renewables is what we can get done in short amount of time, definitely by 2038. And that would put us right in line with our competition in the Caribbean and our family in the Caribbean. And CARICOM as a 47% stake, that's what they want to see by 2027. So if you compare where we are on the left with the original plan and compare what we could absolutely get to on this plan, it's incredible to see the difference. And that's where we want to be going as a country, I'm sure. And it's important that we voice that. I don't know if there's any other points on that. So please support the plan. The most important thing is to submit your response and to talk about how this all happened. Basically, it was a lot of luck. So it was very sad that a big mentor of ours, Barrett Lightbourne, passed in August, and he was a real shining star, and had done solo work here in the 70s and 80s, and had mentored a few engineers here. Some of them are here tonight, and a big mentor to us at B Solar. And so before that, this whole process, we had almost given up because some decisions had been made in the years past, recently I should say, last year, that really made us wonder what is going on? Where is our country going? Does it even make sense? Because every hour we spend here, Eugene included, Chris, it's hours we're taking away from running our businesses and keeping people employed. And that's really important. But Barrett passed, and we said, this IRP process, we've spoken to Chris on the phone. He said, you know, you guys going to do something? He said, we really don't have time. And he said, well, maybe Etude could do something. You know, they really know what they're doing. They've done a lot of policy work in England for much larger jurisdictions than Bermuda. And we said, we're going to do this to honor Barrett. We're going to put in the seed money to get this going. And Etude, I think in about 2 weeks, created this 56-page document that Balco took about a year to do and $1 million easily. So it's really impressive for Chris and Etude, the work that they've done. I think they should get a round of applause for that. So that got it going. And then people started to go to betterenergyplan.bm and get things going. And we said, we've got to get Etude here. So, you know, Etude, you got to come. And Etude did not want to have it just stop at the report because it could have just stopped there and nothing would have happened. Without public support, the regulatory authority can easily just default to the original plan. The whole point is public needs to get involved. So then Etude set up a funding site for themselves, and we can show what that looks like. It's an Indiegogo page, and anybody is please welcome to go there. And again, Etude has put in about $10,000 plus worth of free hours. Eugene has been incredible in Greenrock, and there's a lot of people behind the scenes, Ann Hyde, Glenn Fobler, a lot of people that have put in their time and effort, and thank everyone for it. So now we're at the point where, you know, it's Bermuda's plan. People have put in $20 into this fundraising campaign. People have put in $50. People have put in $2,000 anonymously. There's over 55 people. We're very close to Etude hitting their goal of $17,000 to keep this plan going and to come here and everything. And by the way, we spoke to Jack Ward, a big consultant, environmental guy, great guy. He said, $17,000 is probably the best value for money Bermuda's ever got. So the next page will show, well, I think we already showed at the beginning how many people have gotten involved. So now it's basically your plan, right? This is Bermuda's plan. It's not Etude or Bisolo's or Greenrock's. This is the people of Bermuda's decision to make this plan a reality. And I don't know if you want to add to that, Chris or Eugene.
Yeah. So the main reason we did all of this is because we need people to respond to the consultation. So like if no one does anything and like the regulatory authority doesn't get a single response, then Belco's plan is the default plan and that just gets implemented. If that plan is approved, that basically dictates what electricity generation technologies will be built in Bermuda over the next 20 years. And so once we build LNG, it doesn't necessarily make sense to then deploy some of these other technologies. So we have until the 30th of November for people to write in if you think everything we've shown you this evening makes sense and you support it. And so what we've done, because like most people aren't energy experts and they don't want to read a 30-page consultation document and try and figure out how to respond, we've just done a one-pager of instructions that's like really simple to read. There's a template, so if you do want to respond, you can just use the template and submit that. And then if you have 20 minutes, there is some additional guidance that might help kind of guide you on what to write. And to date, we've had over 100 people who have committed to submitting a response. And people have been like they've been like emailing what they're writing in every week. And it's been really incredible to see the kind of level of enthusiasm. So that's really the most important thing, I think, is, you know, if you want to see like a better energy future for Bermuda, go home, download the template, have a think about it, and write in and make sure you kind of take advantage of this opportunity.
And tonight we have hard copies for those who are more of a pencil and pen type of situation. There's hard copies here to fill out. And we're going to go to question and answer. Well, Eugene will say something first. Well, I set up for a nice video to watch before that, a short one.
Okay. So yeah, so while Stuart gets the video ready, one thing I just wanted to ask, if we could all give Chris Warboys a round of applause, because he's been someone who's left the country working for a great company and has come home to use his knowledge and wisdom to assist us. So we really appreciate it. It's been great. I've learned so much from having Chris here. And thank you to all the Bermuda College students. They actually have to go back to class now. Yeah. They had a 3-hour class tonight, so they spent the first 1.5 hours with us, so we appreciate that. But yeah, it's really been great having the guys from Etude. You know, I've learned so many different technical terms. I had no idea what curtailment was and before a few weeks ago. But we just want to open things up now. Does anyone, oh, you have the video ready? Yeah, let's show this. This is a great video which starts off with the Prime Minister, or is this the Energy Minister? Prime Minister in Jamaica, yes. Okay.
Small island developing states are usually very vulnerable to oil price movements and energy shocks. And therefore, I'm standing here leading a small island developing state, making the commitment to have my country energy secure by using renewables, in particular solar and wind.
We emit negligible greenhouse gases, but when the impact comes, we are most impacted. The Prime Minister believes in what we are doing, believes that renewable energy has a role and a place in the Jamaica energy mix. A commitment has been made for transformation at the Office of the Prime Minister.
The current policy of the government of Jamaica is that 30% of our electricity should be generated by renewables by the year 2030. I believe we can do better. So I have directed the government to increase our target from 30% to 50%.
That we do have to look at our energy resources, the wind, the sun. It shows good leadership for the Office of the Prime Minister to be outfitted with solar panels which will reduce their consumption.
My team from Envisage Future Energy Limited are excited to be working at the Office of the Prime Minister. We are installing Solaria photovoltaic panels and N-phase microinverters.
Solar Estate is an NGO that works internationally with countries around the world that are already embracing renewable energy. And Solar Estate has previously worked in St. Lucia and the Maldives to do solar installations on prominent government buildings. Island countries like Jamaica, across the Caribbean, Pacific and Indian Oceans, are really embracing renewables as part of their wide efforts to decarbonize their economies. So this year we ran the Jamaica Solar Challenge in partnership with local youth groups, which invited young people from across Jamaica to create innovative communications projects to tell their communities about the benefits of renewable energy.
We are building the resilience of the country. We have to transform a number of our production processes, and the only way to do that is with renewables.
It takes leadership. It takes the leaders of the country to bring this awareness to their people. And now we're moving to ensure that renewables play an even greater part in our energy mix.